Are you trying to win the Captain Obvious Award here today? You're going to give me something, or are you just going to say things that you've practiced? I mean, come on, man. Hey, gee whiz. Let's go to the big gaffe that we had. Well, not the big gaffe, but the big story about J.R. Pagliarini and the campaign manager and his decision to leave the campaign after a story breaks that had people confused about payroll, the payroll that he was receiving as the campaign manager of the Chafee campaign, and the private information that came out of the Department of Labor and Training through some channel yet unknown. J.R. Pagliarini suggested that he had been invaded, more or less.
We really should find out who's leaking information that is highly confidential.
And you're furious over Social Security numbers.
Social Security number, my bank routing number, and my home address are on those documents, and that has me infuriated.
Burden of proof here is not a criminal case in terms of making them go forward. I think they have a managerial responsibility to track down this leak. That's their responsibility because it came from their shop. That's where all the evidence points.
Yeah. So that's an excerpt of the lawyer and friend of J.R. Pagliarini the day after he decided that he was going to leave the campaign. I'm still puzzled. We'll ask Link Chafee about the decision for him to leave the campaign. But you said that you had learned about it and this saga, if you will, contemporary with the news being broadcast, correct?
Yeah, I was sitting with some of the people on helping me on the campaign, and somebody on their laptop saw the news flash go across the one of the news websites.
You understand why reasonable people would suggest that because the last working position between, well, prior to his unemployment and his taking of the job with Link Chafee was with higher education. You understand why there are some folks out there who would, on a common sense level, suggest that this leak of confidential information would have come from your camp, given that your dad is the chairman of the Board of Higher Education. You understand why people would think that, don't you?
Well, I'd take offense to someone putting my dad in the middle of something like that.
But because there are appearance issues, most candidates in this situation, looking to get on top of a fair play matter, would say something like, look, from what I don't know anything about this, but I can promise you, I'm going to vet it and make sure that none of our folks had their hands on this. Why didn't you do that?
Nobody on my campaign has any involvement in this, so that's the vetting that needed to be done.
You knew that the entire way. When the story came out, what was your natural reaction? Did you talk to campaign employees about this? Did you ask what they knew about it? Did you do any of that at all?
Nobody in my campaign was involved in this.
How do you know that?
They haven't been.
How do you know?
I'm telling you, I'm sitting here telling you that nobody was involved.
What process did you go through to assure yourself of that notion?
I've listened to the people on the campaign, and nobody's involved.
Meaning you asked everybody?
I'm answering your question, yes.
You asked everybody.
This has been an important topic. Nobody in my campaign was involved.
And you know that because you did what? You talked with everybody involved in your campaign? You asked everybody involved in your campaign whether they knew anything about this or whether they had a hand in passing along information or any of those things. Did you do that vetting?
Dan, I've answered your questions.
Well, I'm going to keep asking the question. Did you vet this with your campaign employees, staff, volunteers, whomever, and ask them if they had any hand in the dissemination of this story that ended up with Jim Terracani at Channel 10 airing it? Did you do those things? When you say that they had no involvement, the people of Rhode Island want to know how you know that. So please tell us.
I've answered the question. Nobody in my campaign had any involvement in this activity.
And you won't tell me how you know that. Did you pray on it? Did the angel Gabriel come down and tell you this? How do you know this?
Dan, I've answered the question.
There's a state police investigation on this. the state police came back and say, guess what? Person or persons involved were working on behalf of Frank Caprio, what will you do?
Dan, I'll fully cooperate and answer any questions, and anybody in my campaign will also do that.
Say you're elected governor, and the investigation comes out. Hypothetical, because they've got to have a resolution for this. State police probably is the last case they want to take, but they've got it. They cannot report out, and they certainly can't tell us they couldn't figure out who it was. They're too good. So on the off chance that it was somebody involved in your campaign, what will you do?
If whoever's responsible for this, they'll have to pay the consequences, period.
Will you pay the consequences if they had a relationship with you? You're so cocksure and certain that your campaign had nothing to do with this. Will you put your gubernatorial life on the line over it? Are you so sure that your campaign had nothing to do with this, that God forbid, on the infinitesimal chance that the state police come back and say, folks involved with the Caprio campaign got this information, will you resign your governor's seat? Will you? What kind of action would you take, since you're so absolutely certain, without telling us how, that you have nobody involved in your campaign that knew anything about this? What will happen?
Dan, nobody's above the law.